Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to this night-ending bonus. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. And let's jump in to this night-ending bonus upload. Shall we? Today's first encounter. Mike lives near Irwin, Tennessee, along with his wife and their dog. Mike and his wife have had 2 encounters with feral wild men. One encounter was just recent. Mike said the first encounter was back in June of 2019 when he and his wife were both in their living room together watching TV at around 8 p.m. They were both startled when they saw a deformed man's face appear in a window. Mike's wife literally yelled out in fright, stared at them, and gave them an evil smile and ran off into the woods. They did call the police. Police searched the yard and tree line but found nothing. By 11 p.m., while in bed, Mike and his wife, who couldn't sleep and had the gun nearby, heard disturbing laughter from outside of the window. The laugh was a lunatic-type laugh. Mike took his gun and went out the door and out of his porch, where he yelled, "Get the hell out of here," and shot 2 rounds into the ground. Mike saw not 1 but 2 wild men run from behind his shed into the woods. Mike was so disturbed at the sight of them that he shut and locked the door. He returned to the bed with his wife, but they both could not sleep. The following morning, Mike's wife routinely let their dog outside to use the restroom. The dog will do her business, then will always return to the front door and scratch to be let in. The dog was not seen again since his wife let her outside that morning. Just last week, Mike's wife had a sighting. She was returning home from the supermarket and was unloading groceries from her truck when something up in the trees grabbed her attention. She saw a deformed man up in a tree staring at her and grinning widely. She got back in her truck and left and drove to her husband's office. They both don't know what to do because the police are finding nothing and they feel like they are not being taken seriously by law enforcement. Mike did install several security cameras. Mike's description of the wild man: taller than 6 foot, thin but toned body, long hair on their heads with patches of hair throughout their bodies, pale gray skin, long fingernails. Eyes are large and wide and are black. Looks like a man/Bigfoot troll mix, deformed features in the face and head. Update. Mike did locate the dog about 1/8 of a mile from his house in the woods, dead. The dog was not in great condition, and I will not go into those details here, but fur was how he recognized his dog. To be conservative, there was not much left but fur and bones. The wife does believe a feral wild man is responsible. Mike and his wife continue to have sightings, but mostly up in trees. They have excluded the police because the police never find anything and have told Mike and his wife that they are most likely seeing campers throughout the woods. Mike's wife stated that she is aware of times when the feral wild men are near because of an odor, a very distinct odor. The wife seems to be having more sightings than her husband. They believe the feral men are more interested in her. They have had one additional scare of something peeking through their window and described the face as looking like an evil Smeagol from Lord of the Rings, describing the hit-and-miss strings of long hair and almost bald scalp. They have both heard a lunatic-type laughing in the woods at night. It's not everyday occurrence, but they are afraid, they are mindful and careful. Mike says it's one of those things where you have to try to live with it, stay out of the woods and stay armed just in case. The wife is sure these feral wild men are not Bigfoot and not campers just messing with them. Today's second encounter. This takes place in my hometown of Vernon, New Jersey, 2009. The town is near the northern tip of New Jersey in the Appalachian Mountains and borders New York State. I was 17 at the time and at a party with friends. The town's very large and divided up into different communities, most lake-based. But the one my friend's house was in was called Old Orchard. It's more developed than the typical neighborhood, but was up a steep hill with lots of woods around it. It was a summer evening, so we spent our time outside in their backyard. Some people were drinking, but myself and the other witness were not. The backyard had a thin tree line dividing it from another lot behind it, and with leaves on the trees, it was thick enough to block your view from the yard. Well, after dark, I went through the tree line and into the next lot with someone. We walked a few steps through the trees, and we sat down with our backs to the tree line facing the lot, which was a large upward sloping hill with a single tree in the center, maybe 100 yards from us. The lot was bordered on the right by a road with a street light that partially illuminated the area, and to the left there were similar tree lines bordering other properties. After sitting and talking for a while, we both fell quiet when we heard something. It was just for a moment, but it sounded like sniffing, like the sound of a dog makes, with its nose to the ground searching for something. I was facing the tree line bordering my friend's property. We could clearly hear everyone in the yard carrying on only feet away. The sniffing sound did not continue. I glanced around behind me into the lot and saw nothing. We continued to talk. To preface the rest of the story, I want to note that northern New Jersey has a large black bear population, and in my town it is very common to see them in your yard, crossing the road, or even have them break into your home in search of food. Combine that with being someone who spent a lot of time outside and in the woods, I know what a bear looks like and how it moves and sounds. And I know what other large predators are in the area, and what I saw was none of these things. So some time passes, long enough to forget about the phantom sniffing, and then I hear it again. And the other person does as well. It's the same nose to the ground, sniffing out prey type sound, and it's loud and seemingly coming from all around us. We can still hear the party going on, and as loud as the sniffing is, they don't seem to notice it. I look at the person I'm with. They're frozen, with their eyes locked on something ahead of them. I turn and face into the lot as the sniffing continues. And under the tree I see a large dark outline of something. It's shaped like a bear, but larger, standing about 6 feet on all fours. Its head's down to the ground, and it's sniffing around under the tree. But it still makes no sense that we would be able to hear it from all the way from where we were, let alone how loud it was. Then it moves forward, and that's when I am certain it's not an animal I am familiar with, because it puts its 2 front legs out first, and then its back legs shuffle forward in one motion like a rabbit or a kangaroo. I didn't watch for very long, but enough to see it keep shuffling forward like that for a few more times. The whole time its head is to the ground, sniffing as loud as its breathing in our ears. Again, it was only bright enough to see the silhouette, but it appeared to have fur. I had a strong feeling that it could feel me looking at it, and if I kept watching it, it would notice me. And I did not want that to happen. The person and I locked eyes, grabbed each other's hands, and bolted back to the yard. No one else noticed. Most were too drunk to even know we were gone. It was late, and I convinced some people to go inside to the living room and sleep. Other people stayed out in the yards in the tent, but no one mentioned anything weird the next morning. We didn't tell anyone what had happened during the party, and the reason the other witness is someone, and not my friend, is because they were really just an acquaintance I met and was trying to hook up with. I never saw them again. I don't even know their last name. I want to contact them and ask them about it. And we didn't speak of it to each other while at the party either. Northern New Jersey is supposed to have Bigfoot-type cryptid called the Big Red Eye, and the Jersey Devil, of course, but I don't think this fits any. I've had a lot of paranormal experiences in my life, but this is the only cryptid type I've ever had. I don't know what it was, but I got a distinct feeling it was something that I was not supposed to see. Today's third part of the upload. This is what I was talking about in the first encounter. Feral humans, categorized into three basic types. First, the existence of people who have mental transformations in the woods and have entered an animal-like state, which has been documented. Second, people who have been raised from birth in the wild as feral humans in North America, specifically Appalachia. Third, people who deliberately choose this lifestyle. Further, we are convinced that a certain percentage of these so-called Bigfoot sightings are actually these feral humans, or persons in near feral state. The Mays Lick area had an albino Bigfoot flap in the 1980s, which could be a human being living in the wild. October 7th, 1980, Mays Lick, Kentucky, Mason County. Charles Fulton and his family were watching television when they heard a loud noise on the front porch. Fulton said he heard his son's pet rooster disturbed when he peered out the front door. He saw a white, hairy creature with pink eyes that must have weighed 400 pounds and was about 7 feet tall. The creature was holding the rooster by its neck and then threw it against the side of the house. It then proceeded around back of the house into a vacant lot. Fulton claimed to have grabbed his .22 pistol and followed the intruder, fired at the creature twice as it ran out of sight. Fulton believes that the lights coming from his porch and living room may have frightened the creature, and that is why it seemed to go on a rampage. Fulton said that this white hair was real long, much like a horse's mane. He also stated that the creature was man-like, except the eyes were like that of an animal. November 5th, 1980, Mason County, Kentucky, west of Maysville on US 68. Mr. Noble Clay, an Alabama truck driver, was hauling steel west on US Route 68. When he saw a figure on the opposite side of the highway, he slowed his vehicle and turned on his high beams, thinking that it was a hitchhiker. When he approached the figure, he was shocked to see an enormous humanoid creature with white hair. After this encounter, he contacted locals on CB Channel 22 to see if there was a zoo or circus in the area. He thought that possibly an ape had escaped. When police were called to investigate, they took Clay's statement and filed a report. He stated to the police that he had never been to this area before and knew nothing about alleged Bigfoot reports. The police believed that Clay was serious on what he reported. This incident was on file with the Maysville, Kentucky Police Department. Summer of 1985, Estill County, Kentucky. After local residents began reporting a man-like figure prowling in the woods near their homes, Bigfoot rumors began circulating like wildfire in the area. Police combed the wilderness in the area and apprehended name withheld a native of Irvine, Kentucky, who had been on the missing persons list for 3 years, according to reports. He was naked but covered with mud and foliage to the extent that vines and moss and lichen were actually growing in his hair and on his body. He was in a completely animal-like state, could not and would not speak English, and had to be forcibly subdued. He was taken to Patty A. Clay Hospital in Richmond. We have no further reports on his recovery. The spring of 1990, Red River Gorge near Slade, Kentucky in Powell County. An author encountered a face-to-face in the wilderness near Cloud Splitter Rock. An adult 30s Caucasian male walking in the woods naked but covered with mud, leaves, and vines, which were matted into his hair and beard as well, giving him an almost absurd swamp thing appearance. He walked with a hunched, ape-like gait. He spotted moments after I spotted him, and we stared at each other for what seemed like an eternity. Finally he turned and fled. His eyes seemed to show some intelligence, but he was still extremely animal-like and seemingly unable to speak. I made no effort to follow him. The similarities between this case and the ones above are striking. Today's fourth part is where some of these missing persons and theories of cryptids and these so-called wild men or interbred, whatever the hell they are, comes to light right now. I live in the Great Smoky Mountains, and I know what snatches children. I'm on the North Carolina side of the Great Smoky Mountains, lived there my entire life. All of us know what's in these woods and mountains. Since the 30s and 40s, there have been feral wild men living in these mountains. They are fast. They will snatch livestock and children. The FBI knows. It's why they don't get involved. I've heard other stories that there are some attempt to kill these feral wild men, but they still exist even today. And I'm not talking about some end-of-the-day extremist who took the woods. I mean feral, completely wild men with their own language living underground. We don't go into these woods at night. During the day we make sure to stay on the trails. Sometimes you will smell it, that putrid scent. At night you'll hear them hollering, supposed inbreds. The locals around here know what happened to Dennis Martin. He was snatched by one of those wild feral men. It's not uncommon for people to go missing here. They are normally found, but you'd also be surprised at the number of children who simply disappear. The FBI has covered it up for years. Where do you think the movie The Hills Have Eyes come from? It's true. I hear them from time to time, disturbing sounds. They live all up and down the mountains here, in national parks and forests. The stories that we all heard growing up about the feral wild men were told to us due to the fact that so many people would go missing in the mountains. Of course, it was a way for our parents to scare us so we wouldn't wander off too far from them or venture off into the woods alone, and Dennis Martin was used as an example. My grandfather recalls the newspapers blowing the story up in 1969, I believe. The newspapers said one thing, while TN and NC locals said another. The locals said this then, and they said this now. There are wild feral men living in these mountains. The government does know they are here, and they have made attempts to kill them off, but they have not been able to kill them all yet. Yet the population now is thought to be minimal. One of these feral wild men abducted Dennis Martin and ate him. This particular feral was spotted by a family in the woods who were in the same vicinity and stated they saw a feral trying to hide from them behind a bush and was hanging onto a small child from its back like a backpack. The feral was described as being very hairy and tall, wearing a well-worn dirty shirt. The military came and stayed for a week in the mountains, killing a handful of the feral wild men, including the one who abducted Dennis. Dennis's bones were found by the military, but this was hidden from the family and the papers. One of the agents that worked on this and was ordered into the woods to kill the feral men ended up committing suicide some years later, not being able to cope with what he had seen in those mountains all those years and after other assignments into similar incidences. My grandfather claimed to have seen 2 of them in his life. He told me that his first encounter was when he was a child, years before the Martin case, when he and his dad were on a trail in the woods on the Tennessee-North Carolina line when they both approached a dead-end area that bordered a heavy tree line. Just inside the tree line, they saw a wild hillbilly leaning over a deer, eating its insides. Wild hillbilly is what my grandfather said the locals used to call them long before any media named them anything else. The wild hillbilly was manlike, long hair, and was very oily and dirty. The body hair was extensive. The man was bloody, having obviously just killed the deer. My grandfather said that his dad would later say that the hillbilly had a string of deer guts in his deformed hand. My grandfather has always mentioned the smell of pure garbage and vomit. They both stopped and walked backwards until they were out of the hillbilly's sight, but said the hillbilly was obviously startled and screaming, as if saying, "Stay the fuck back, this is my deer." The hillbilly was dragging the deer back further into the tree line as my grandfather and his dad backed away. The second sighting was when my grandfather was hunting in '97. He and his buddy saw a female. They said they were taken back at the obvious sign of breasts, but this one looked more Bigfoot-like. She was running and then suddenly jumped into some hole in the ground and disappeared. They did not go looking for it. This is where the underground cave systems come into play. Inside the mountains and in the caves is where these wild men Bigfoot creatures are at. And that's why they cannot be found. It's worldwide. Governments know of them. They don't get involved with these creatures unless there's a disappearance and they have to go in and kill, as they did with Dennis Martin. Our governments admitting to these creatures and UFOs would break down our religious systems. Dealing with public about these creatures is something that has been avoided for years at all costs. Our caves and mountains can't be controlled. The underground cave systems are massive, and what's in them is beyond basic human comprehension. Yes, these wild feral men are cannibal and inbred. They will often snatch children to eat. Some are raised to reproduce. The geriatric population and disabled are easy targets for food because it's not expected they'll fight back. They also have trapdoors in the woods and doors in the mountains. They will often steal clothing, dig in trash, take pets and farm animals. Though I personally have never seen a wild feral man, I do have evidence of them. The smell also. I have tons of stories and other things I've seen out in these mountains, more demonic, but so far I have yet to see a wild feral man. I believe, though, only because of the other things I have experienced out here throughout my life. I believe that a lot of the missing 411 cases will not be solved. Kids, hunters, tourists, all missing in a blink of an eye. Everyone always expects reasonable explanations for things because we are still so primitive. Our eyes are just not open to what's really out there. I do not believe much of the population could mentally handle or cope with it if they did know the truth. I believe the wild feral men are Panamanian jungle was also responsible for the Frone Kramers case. I am a believer, yet I still live here in these woods. If you're a hiker, a hunter, or grew up around the mountains, then you know the hold that the mountains and forests can have over you. Such beauty, such fright. Today's final encounter. I went on a family vacation to the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm not sure what month it was, but in the spring. We'd been there a few days, exploring just everywhere. This is something we have done every year, but this year it turned out to be very different. It was the day before we were about to leave and head back home. My dad decided we would all take a walk down the trails and streams. We were at Deep Creek Loop Trail. My dad had taken his fishing pole. Dad, Mom, my brother, myself were walking by the stream. My brother and I kind of walked away from the stream a little ways off the trail into the woods. I'm not sure how far from my parents. I do know I couldn't see them anymore. I don't remember if my brother or myself saw it first. From a side view, my first thought was an animal because of the movement in the trees. So being very quiet, we stepped to the side by the tree to hide and be able to watch it. What I thought was an animal was indeed not. It heard us and turned toward us. What I saw was horrifying. It was bent over, devouring a dead animal, possibly a deer. It was tearing its guts out and eating it. It had bloody hands, face, and chest. I saw enough to know this was not an animal, but dear God, it was not a man either. It had blood, flesh hanging from its mouth and hands. It had a large forehead that looked like it had knots. It was very hairy, but not as hairy as a bear or Bigfoot, and between the blood and skin looked dirty. It was a deformed man. We were so scared my brother took off, running first, then I followed. I turned just for a second to see if it was coming after us. As I was turning to run also, it took off running the other way. It didn't stand totally straight up, but I could tell it was a male. By what I saw, it was at least 6 feet tall, may have been even taller. Since he didn't stand straight, it was hard to tell. He was pretty thick, but still very skinny and deformed. What got me was how it looked like a human man and a creature mix. I could also smell an odor that was like flesh and garbage. We ran back to my parents and told them. My dad at first thought we might have been trying to pull a prank on him. He played along and walked back to where he had come from. A minute later, he came back and said, "We have to go now." His face was pale, like he had lost all his color. We went to a ranger and told him everything. He said he was going to call another ranger, and they would look into it. They thanked us as we drove off. That was our last visit there. I had nightmares for a while, but never spoke of it to anyone. I still don't know what we saw, but this was a man that was mixed with a monster. Well, there you have it, folks. This night-ending bonus upload, which I hope you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and honestly what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free, just simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.